together. The Spanish had settled among the Adayes. Those were the Adayes Indians. But it was Nuestra Señora de Pilar de los Adayes that the Spanish tradition of naming places after saints, after it could be the environment, it could be the indigenous peoples, and it just kind of gets abbreviated shortly to Los Adayes. But that gives us an overview. And the picture on the left is what archaeologists believe was the Arroyo Hondo, which looks like a creek today that is just could be any creek. But I was asked at a Western History Association conference years ago, but was it really much of a border? And I said, well, it isn't much of a border. It doesn't look like much of a border, but it very much meant a lot if you were a deserter from the military, if you were a smuggler, or if you were a fugitive slave. And all these things were going on back and forth across the border. There were African slaves who had fled French masters and sought asylum in the Spanish missions of East Texas. Nobody ever tells that story. So that the Spanish are going, oh boy, do we go ahead and, return the slave, or do we allow him freedom in Texas? There's a lot of implications here. But nonetheless, you can see on the right-hand side the Arroyo Hondo, which is just a little spring-fed creek. And this is halfway between Natchitoches and Louisiana. And that was determined in the 1730s and 40s. And in a large picture, we have the transfer of Louisiana from France to Spain in 1762, such that Mississippi becomes the new international boundary. And this is what ends up ultimately leading to the abandonment of Los Adayes after Ruby's inspection for a number of reasons, some that I just mentioned to you, but mainly because the border had shifted to the east. Mind you, the same thing is happening in West Florida at Pensacola, the same thing, and they had also pulled soldiers from Veracruz, Mexico, to go over there and man Pensacola. But they had the issue to deal with of hurricanes, which was an even greater problem. But the idea was to contain the French here. That changed after the French and Indian War, because now the Spanish are wanting to prevent the British from having access to the Gulf, from which to be able to attack New Spain and capture the silver trade either overland or by sea. And that helps us to understand why eventually, the importance of Nuevo Santander and those settlements in the lower Rio Grande. But we have then Pedro Tejeda, who doesn't seem to fit this narrative, because in looking at the Sacramento records for San Fernando, he wants to marry Francisca Perez, who is from the Villa de San Fernando. And however, he is from Mexico City, and the way that he actually gets there is a circuitous route. Nonetheless, they knew each other for a little while, and others have to testify on their behalf. And what's interesting, though, is that before coming to San Antonio, he had gone to Havana, Cuba. He had served in Havana. He had left Veracruz with the Company of the Americas. And mind you, this is in the aftermath of the French and Indian War, in which the British had captured Havana, Cuba for almost 1 year. And the Spanish people who were in Havana, Cuba, and seeing how efficiently the British were running things, were like, wow, we should have this kind of thing. And the Spanish really, in a way, kind of provoked even further these so-called reformas bourbonas, the Bourbon reforms. And it was in that context that you have Pedro de Tejeda, who is in Havana, Cuba, leaves by boat with 5,500 men, goes to New Orleans. From New Orleans, he goes to Los Adayes, because he goes up the Mississippi to where it joins the Red River. The Red River, he goes to Natchitoches, and from Natchitoches goes to Los Adayes, and then he comes down the Camino Real, he ends up in San Antonio. And New Orleans is precisely one of the locations in which some of the Alessandro soldiers were reaching in the first place. And it is interesting that Dr. Carolina Castillo-Crem yesterday was just talking about Patricia and the De Leons and how she went to New Orleans.